Welcome, Australia. It's that time again for another podcast from the Mate team, where we try and get into your head with stuff that makes us sound smart. Sit back and relax. It's time for us to be mates. Hi, Australia. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Be Mate podcast. We've got Dom and Bosco here. Boys, how are you doing today?
Good, Vaz.
Good, mate.
Awesome. I think we've got a good show lined up today. Something people wouldn't find as exciting as other topics that we've done or that we're doing, but I think it's something very relevant to the current situation and dynamic that the world's in at the moment. We've got David McIver. David is the CEO of WorkSafety.co. So he spends his life making sure people in the workplace and at home have the right setup to ensure they don't have any type of injuries when they're in the workspace and in the work environment. And I think a lot of the stuff that he's going to talk about today is going to be very new to a lot of us. And so let's talk to David. David, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Let's Be Mates podcast. We're glad to have you on
mates.
board. Yes, we are all mates. Thanks for joining us and thanks for giving us your time. I know you're a very busy person and you do a very crucial job for us all Aussies.
And it's an interesting time in which we live, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think our business has seen a lot of change with this. I think people have considered, internet services an essential service. And I think what you do in your role is just as essential to what we do as well. And I guess that leads into our viewers would love to hear about what your role is, the business that you work for, and what you actually do.
Well, I'm a CEO and founder of a consulting and training company called WorkSafety.co. I've actually been in the health and safety training consulting field for 30 odd years. When we first started out, health and safety, work health and safety and occupational health and safety is really about factories and manufacturing and fixed workplaces and so on. And the health and safety legislation is based on that kind of model as well. So over the years, I've noticed the transition, not just in the nature of workplaces, but the nature of work itself. And in recent years, obviously, there's been a great increase in the number of people, particularly in the knowledge and education sectors, doing their work remotely. Now, most of the time that means from their home. The studies indicated, and this was up until the coronavirus thing came along, that within the next few years, up to 50% of people would be working full or at least part-time remotely, and again, most of the time from their homes. Now, when I was looking at health and safety issues and so on, there's lots of books and so on around on working from home, but there was nothing on working from home safely. So being a safety consultant, I decided I'd write the book. So I wrote the Working from Home Safety Handbook, and we released that last year, the end of last year, just before the COVID-19 issue came along. So it's quite amazing the timing, but it's highly relevant, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
And David, obviously working from home, as you said, is a growing trend, particularly at the moment. So talk to us a little bit about the right setup for a work from home professional based on your opinion and your field of work.
Yeah, Ross, look, it's even more important now. I mean, a lot of the focus on the book pre-COVID was just on that, on getting the home workplace set up appropriately and so on. And there was sort of a lot of emphasis on the worker working from home, talking to their employer in order to develop appropriate flexible working arrangements and working from home agreements with the employer prepared to help the home-based worker set up their workstation at home appropriately. And that includes the chair and the desk and the IT connection, all of these sorts of things that go into having an effective workstation. Now, with COVID-19 and social isolation and quarantining and people not coming into work anymore, there's not really been the opportunity for that consultation to take place between the employer and the employees working from home. Uh, However, as we're starting to come out of isolation, I think there's no longer any excuse for that conversation not to now be carried out, whereby the employer and the employee working from home reach agreement on a whole range of things, not just to do with the physical workstation setup and so on, but hours of work, maintaining a sense of work-life balance, and a sense of my time, my space, understanding priorities, all these kinds of issues are associated with working effectively from home.
Yeah, on that point, my previous life before, mate, I worked at Microsoft, and during my time there, we transitioned to hot seating and working from home, and it really became a sort of a trend and a focus at Microsoft. And what happened was that we, obviously no one had the same desk they had every day. So when they went into the office, Microsoft controlled the setup in the office. But due to the working from home, everybody did their own thing and were left to their own way of doing it. And what happened is that Microsoft realized that they needed to also educate the employees of their setup at home if they're allowing them to work from home as well. And so they really started focusing on ergonomics and obviously and doing training courses and making sure people are certified to understand the setup at home. And have you seen that coming from businesses as well?
Oh, look, not enough in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's almost been left to the employee working from home to sort it out for themselves. So we're seeing all kinds of strange arrangements, like people sitting on collapsible chairs at the kitchen table with awful postures and so on. So, and a lot of time working or using laptops instead of proper desk computers. Now, the thing we need to understand about a laptop is that if you get the keyboard at the best height, then the monitor screen is going to be far too low, which results in craning of the neck and head pointing downwards, and that'll lead to neck and shoulder pain and so on. Whereas if you put the monitor at the right height, the keyboard's going to be far too high. And a lot of the time, we're seeing people working from home using laptops and putting themselves at some significant risk of what we now call musculoskeletal disorders, MSDs, because they're not taking the time to get the ergonomics of the workstation correct.
Yeah, my local Physio 360 at Gledwood Hills, give it a bit of a shout out to them. The lady there has been telling me for the last probably year that I've been seeing her that the cases from people from the professional office environment and that work from home is just increasing and increasing. And she said, even though she loves the business, the problem is that obviously it's to your point. She's saying that no one's getting educated about how to set themselves up properly at home to make sure that they don't have any type of injuries or anything happening, especially around neck pain. Neck pain is the biggest issue that she's finding at the moment coming through her physio practice.
And if you just think about having a laptop on your desk, and I think Dominic's probably looking at a laptop or something now, and then look at the posture and so on. It's head's leaning forward, therefore the whole weight of the head is taken on the shoulder muscles and the neck muscles and so on. And it's one of the real challenges. I can remember, and look, I've got to say, a fair part of this working from home safety handbook is to do with general ergonomics and so on. But when I was writing the book last year, I took myself to the local library to get out of my office, and I found a nice quiet area which was mainly inhabited by year 12 and uni students and so on. And I was working away on my laptop, and I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy, because this is exactly the kind of posture I'm advising against. Yeah. So I got some thick reference books from the shelves, put my laptop on top of the books so that I was able to look directly at the monitor screen. And then I invested in a Bluetooth keyboard and a Bluetooth mouse so that I could operate the keyboard at roughly the right sort of height, along with the mouse and so on. And I was aware of the sort of the giggles and the sniggers from some of the other millennials in the room looking at this silly old bloke with these workstations set up. However, within a few days, quite a few of the other kids were doing the same thing, because they're all on their laptops, and they all started to realise that really using laptops for normal work situations is problematic. So 2 screens, and that's certainly one of the recommendations we have, is that most of the time someone working from home is probably going to be using the laptop, but they ought to invest in another monitor, good quality monitor, which could be either provided by their employer, or at least some arrangement come to maybe salary sacrificing or something like that. And that becomes the main monitor, which actually I'm looking at the moment. My main monitor has the camera on top. The laptop is off to the side. It's operating as a second screen. In fact, I've got a third screen. And so I've got 3 screens in an array, all at the right sort of height, which allow me to sort of look at various functions and things going on at the one time. So, look, if you wanted to talk about ergonomics, could I suggest that the starting point, in fact, is the chair. The chair really becomes the starting point, and some of the basic principles of a good chair, that you ought to be able to have your feet flat on the floor. Now, you can use a footrest to change posture and all the rest of it, but I'm talking about a default position here where you have your feet flat on the floor, which means that your lower legs are roughly vertical. Your upper legs are going to be roughly horizontal. We don't have to measure 90 degrees or anything like that, but just something like that. And then your trunk and upper body is roughly at right angles to your upper legs. Now, if you're going to be able to have your feet flat on the floor and your upper legs basically horizontal, most of the time that means a seat has to come down a lot lower than we find with most clerical chairs and most kitchen chairs and dining room chairs and so on. So it's really important, first of all, that, pardon me, the home-based worker invest in getting a good chair. And you don't have to pay thousands of dollars for them. You can get decent height adjustable chairs from office furniture suppliers and Office Works and those sort of places for a couple of $100. And that would be well worth the investment. If we get this seat right, and therefore we're sitting roughly comfortably and so on, that probably means the work surface, the desk or something, needs to come down a bit too. Otherwise, the person's going to be reaching up with their forearms.
In the office here, from where we started to where we are now, obviously you have a story where you start as a business and you have a certain setup, and then as we grow bigger and bigger and get more people in, obviously we've developed the office and different fit outs and things like that, and one of the biggest expenses on our expense sheet is the cost of seats, which no one can believe. But you can see the productivity increase when people have the right setup and are feeling good about how they're working, right? And I think that's a big point to talk about, is that us at Mate, we spend a lot of money on making sure that the call center staff, particularly who are sitting in front of a computer and a phone most days, sitting properly, and with that comes with a bunch of other things, increased productivity, always feeling good, and even down to stand-up desks and things like that, which we've really definitely invested in with our staff as well. And so I think all those things play a part, right?
Look, if someone working from home is going to spend between $5,000 and $10,000 to get properly set up, and that ought to be the subject of a conversation with their employer. I'm talking about spending another 5 to 10%, or
Great.
within that money, 5 to 10% would be devoted to having a chair and a decent workstation. Now, you mentioned standing desks and so on. The basic the principle is getting the chair right is that when you're sitting at your desk, for a start, when you look at your computer monitor, your head naturally has a bit of a downwards tilt, just 5 degrees or something like that. But when you look up, you should be able to see over the top of the monitor to whatever's in the distance, hopefully something a bit further away so your eyes can refocus. For that to work, you need to therefore be able to sit at your desk and have your forearms roughly horizontal onto the desk surface and onto the keyboard and the mouse. So a good rule of thumb is to try to keep your elbows by your side. And if you can keep your elbows by your side without either moving them out or moving them forward, then we've got the basis of a reasonably good ergonomic situation and so on. So the ideal reference height, if you like, for all of this is the fixed elbow height. So when you're sitting, whatever height your elbow is when you're relaxed with your arms by your side, that ought to be the height, roughly the height of the work surface. Now, sitting is being called the new smoking, isn't it? Where people spend far too much time sitting. So
Absolutely.
yes, sit-stand desks are becoming quite the rage. We're fortunate enough in our office. I've got 2 of them in our office, electrically operated. All I have to do is push a button and it's preset so it can go up to the right sort of height.
Oh, great.
When you're going to operate from a standing position, you still need to have your work surface at your fixed elbow height. So basically your whole upper body has the same posture as it would if you were sitting down. But even if you're going to be standing up for part of the time, people imagine that if I have a standing desk, I have to stand up all day. But nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
We're probably talking about 10 minutes in an hour where people would actually stand up, and the rest of the time they'd sit down. Yeah. So even if you're going to work from a standing workstation, you still need a good seat because you'll spend most of your time sitting down. And you don't have to buy a electrically operated programmable height adjustable desk costing a couple of $1,000s. Again, office suppliers have attachments or brackets that can go on the top of normal desks and can be used to raise and lower to whatever's comfortable.
Yeah, getcha.
You're obviously not a tax professional, but is a lot of this stuff tax deductible for people working at home?
It is absolutely tax deductible, but keep your receipts. Now, it's interesting you should raise that because the tax department actually, from the sound of it, is becoming quite empathetic with people working from home. But the home worker still needs to be able to define their workplace. So a corner of the kitchen table while the meals are being prepared does not cut it. Either it's an area of the house, maybe the living room, or preferably a room with a door which can be shut, which then becomes the designated office. And that therefore becomes a taxable, deductible taxation issue.
So, David, I guess you can't say I bought an 85-inch TV screen with to work on and tax deductible. That has to be very relevant, right?
You could try, but I think the tax people are onto all that sort of stuff.
To the listeners, we want to make it very clear, we're not giving out tax advice, all right? So go and seek independently your own tax advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's no good imagining that just because you're working from home on the living room table or the dining room table, that you can now start claiming household expenses and energy and light and all that sort of stuff, because that's not going to work. You need to seek advice from your tax professional. And at the same time, could I suggest that if you are being paid to work from home, you just need to check the contents of your home and contents insurance policy to make sure it allows for paid income derived from working from home. Because it's no good after you have a break-in and lose your computer, or something happens and you claim house and contents insurance for the insurance company then to turn around and say, oh, but you're working from home, but we're not covered.
There's some very clear guidelines around the setup and ergonomics, but what about those other things that a lot of people don't think about, like putting some boundaries around, switching off, getting up, walking around, drinking enough water? What are your thoughts on that?
Yep. Yeah, I think it's really important that the home-based worker is able to define their space, their time, and allow for work-life balance and so on. We're hearing reports of managers being a little bit nervous because they can't see people in the central office, head down, tail up, working away. They get very nervous and suspicious that they're not actually working as hard as they should be. So they're ringing or emailing at all times of the day and night, and are expecting some sort of response. Now, if you work for Amazon, then that's exactly what you have to do. You're available to Amazon 24/7. But in the normal workplace, particularly in Australia, there needs to be some boundaries that are agreed to. For example, if and look, I have a little mnemonic which I'm about to show you on the screen. I can send copies of that to you if you wish.
That'd be great.
Called the Working from Home Safely. And the first letter there, S, means simulate your normal working routine. Keep to the same. So that if you would normally get up at 7 a.m. And go through the normal routine about having a shower and get dressed and have breakfast and so on, then you leave the house, you get on the bus or the train or get in the car or something like that. You might leave home at 8, say, with a view to getting into your central office location by 9, whatever, and you would clock on at 9 a.m. in the morning. Just because you're getting up at 7 a.m. and you're going to be working from home doesn't mean people now can start contacting you from 7 a.m. I think if your normal hours are 9 to 5, that pretty much should be what you try to stick to in order to claim my time and so on. Now, that's something that the employer and your work colleagues need to be aware of, but also family members. Just because mum or dad is down the hall in a room, that needs to be understood that they are at work, and by and large, therefore, not to be disturbed unless it's absolutely something pressing. Now, this week, of course, we've got the gradual starting up again of schools. As many parents have found, this stuff about homeschooling while you're working from home just does not work. That's been really, really difficult. And I think a lot of parents are gaining a lot more appreciation for teachers now after having tried to teach their own kids. But the kids at home need to understand the rules of the game too. If they are from home, there are certain times where mum or dad's at work. But if you're saving an hour or two in the morning because you don't have to commute, and an hour or two in the evening when you don't have to commute, there's a couple of extra hours that the home-based person can devote to interacting with the kids or going for a walk in the park or helping with the schooling or whatever it might be. But one of the great challenges of working from home is how you get away from work. Yeah. It's too easy sometimes to just say, oh, I just want to run off an email and duck down the corridor and log back in at all kinds of the night. And if people start to get used to that happening, then it's very hard to shake that habit. So, at 5 p.m. or 5:30 p.m., whatever time you would normally finish work in your central workplace, you turn your computer off at home, walk out, close the door, and avoid the temptation to come back a bit later on, unless it's obviously urgent.
It's a very good insight. It's something that you don't think about in that context, and that's it's very interesting.
Yeah, I know myself.
Well, it's one of the major sources of stress. Everyone talks about stress at work, and a lot of people are finding that there are different stressors now associated with working from home, particularly if you've got kids to look after, or maybe people with disabilities or aged parents. Even elderly neighbours and so on have been left out of the loop. So there's factors to consider with all of that. How you maintain your physical and mental well-being. And people are really starting to appreciate it. It's nice and sunny today, so we'll get out and go for a bit of a walk in the park. We're allowed to walk in the park. We've always been allowed to walk in the park, maintaining social distancing and so on. And hopefully that might continue, even if there's some return to normality, whatever that might be. Yeah. And it's worthwhile thinking through what's going to happen when the isolation and quarantining requirements finish. And discuss the question whether people are going to return to a central workplace in the same way as they did before all this came along.
It actually leads into the next question. So just on that, so obviously everyone, like a lot of people are at home at the moment still, but what are some things to think about when or if we do return to normality, as you said, and return to an office or workspace? What are some? Have you had any discussions with businesses based on their employees coming back yet, or anything you can share based on that?
Yeah, sure. It's a good point, Ross, because it's something that we're having now to really start to focus on. As I said earlier, before all this came along, it was estimated the next year or so, next couple of years, up to 50% of people would be working full or part-time from home. Now, I think COVID-19 has bumped that up to probably 95% at the moment. And my hunch is that after this is all finished, we're going to stay up around about, say, the 70% level and not 50%. Because people working from home, once they get over the initial challenges, have found that they actually can be quite productive, and that there are lots of advantages they are now finding. They're in their own space, in their own time. Instead of spending hours commuting, they can use that for other purposes. And people are going to find that they can work just as effectively from home as going into a central workplace. Maybe even better, depending on what the personality type of the person is and what the workplace is like. Employers, on the same token, are finding that despite their earlier misgivings, they're finding that productivity has been maintained, that there's lots of things people can be doing from home without having to come into the central workplace. So they're probably going to be far more relaxed about people working from home.
Yeah. On that point, on that point, Dave, sorry to cut you off, is that, one thing we've experienced is staff happiness, right? The eliminating the commute to work and getting up that extra bit earlier potentially, and all those different things have gone away. They spend more time with their families because they have lunch at home, they have breakfast at home, and those things where sometimes all of those things they have at work, right? And so I think even apart from productivity, from a staff happiness perspective, I think that's really shone through into our business. And obviously through happiness comes a harder work, right? And productivity and all those different things. And I think that's something that we've experienced as a business.
Yeah. Look, there's a whole lot of factors tied up in this. Basically human beings, we're hardwired to work in groups. Since we were living in caves, we've always had to work in groups and cooperate and communicate in groups. And a lot of the communication we still have as human beings is non-verbal. Now, we can Zoom as much as we like, such as we are at the moment. One of the things that we miss with these remote meetings and so on is we miss most of the verbal cues. Like at the moment, I can't see whether you're yawning or you're frowning or you're shaking your head or whatever it might be. Particularly if you've got, 40 faces on the screen at the moment. So we're hardwired, we're analog creatures, and here we are trying to survive in a virtual world. And there are some unspoken challenges, just sort of that absence of face-to-face communication, which is difficult to achieve virtually. When we are thinking about returning to work, there's a couple of other elephants in the room that people really haven't thought about. One, how do you get in to work now? Are you going to get in the train or the bus and cheek to jowl with a whole range of other people who may or may not be COVID positive? What happens to social isolation when you're using public transport? Of course, some people are saying, oh, I won't use public transport, I'll drive myself in. Well, if we're going to have all the extra cars on the freeway, how long is that going to take us? And where are we going to park our cars when we get to our central workplace? So how we get there is one issue. The subject of hot desking is becoming rather of interest to employers because they're starting to say, look, if we're going to have a percentage of our workforce working from home each day, then maybe we don't have to have 3,000 square metres of prime central business district office,
Exactly.
which we're renting at an enormous expense. Maybe we can reduce that, and we would then say to our employees, you spend a couple of days a week working from home and you come into the central office a couple of days a week or something along these sort of lines. Okay, fine. Do we provide desks for people when they come back into the central workplace, or are we going to hot desk? Hot desking has some major issues. It's estimated that for something like 40% of illnesses that people get, particularly in winter, from coming into the central office because of contamination of work surfaces, from lift buttons to telephones to desk surfaces, computers, all this sort of thing. So if we're going to have hot desking, then there's a whole range of issues that are going to arise about how we keep that clean, particularly if we're going to be sharing a desk with other people we don't know what their status is or anything like that. So, hot desking is really problematic at the moment. But one of the things the real estate agents are concerned about is a potential drop in value of city accommodation and city buildings by 15, 20%, because people are going to be working from home more.
Which, you make so many points that probably a lot of people don't think about, right? And it just gets me thinking. I know a lot of people that work in businesses that are hot seating, and especially during the COVID time, and whoever needs to be in the office, they have the social distancing where every second desk is getting used, but no one's thinking about the status of the hot seating. So they haven't changed to that's Dom's desk or that's Ross's desk, and it stays that way for this whole period. And so I think you make a valid point there that a lot of people probably aren't factoring in, is that hot seating is random people there. They could be doing anything and come from anywhere, and then that's a challenge to control as well, right? Obviously you use wipes and things like that, but it's a really valid point, David. It's something a lot of businesses need to think about.
And I mean, some companies, maybe even companies like Mate, provide meals and catering and so on for employees. Well, come on, what's going to happen about providing food? And are you going into a canteen area, maintaining social separation, or are you going to put the food into boxes and have people eat at their workstations? And cleaning up after that's going to be a nightmare.
Well, one thing we do, David, so a lot of our background is Italian, and our Italian auntie cooks for us every day in the office, or she used to before COVID. And so when we get back to normal, that's something that we've been talking about. How do we do that ongoing? So
So look, now's the time to think it through. Not when people are coming there with what happens with hot desking or people coming back at the office and a person is diagnosed as COVID positive. Therefore, they might go into hospital, certainly go into quarantine for 14 days, but so too would anybody in that area who may have come into contact with them. So before we all start rushing back, and so we really need to think it through. And then you've got the shared office spaces, particularly for the startups and the millennials and so on. They don't have a central office, but they'll go and make use of the shared office spaces, which offer different programs, don't they? You can actually hire your own office in a serviced office environment, or you could book meeting rooms, or a lot of them are just hot desking. You pay a couple $100 a month and you hot desk, and it's not even the one employer. It's run by a company that's providing the shared space. So, yep, that's there are some challenges which people need to be thinking about, and that's what we're talking about now.
Well, it's been great, David, and we thank you for the information you provided. Where can we get more information? And you did mention that you have written a handbook, right, which I think everybody should get a copy of, especially in the business space. What's it called, David, and where can we buy it?
I'm going to stand up for a moment because I've got sun streaming in and you can't see anything. It's called the Working From Home Safety Handbook, an employee guide to working safely from home. Now, it's not available in the shops. You go to www.worksafetyathome.com or .com.au. So all one word, worksafetyathome.com.au, and you'll see reviews there, little videos, and how to purchase it and all that sort of stuff.
Great. And to our listeners, we'll add
at
this.
At the same time, if it was of interest to you guys, happy to send that to you as a PDF.
That'll be great, David, because what we'll do, we'll add it to our show notes on our podcast pages on Spotify and iTunes and on our website as well. And what we'll do to our listeners, what we'll do, we'll put the website worksafetyathome.com.au, where you can get a copy of David's books as well. And you can go there and click on our website to get a copy of that. Well, David, I think it's any last words from you? I think we've gone over time, but that's fine, which is all good conversation. And I love talking to people that are passionate about their profession. And that's something that we're very passionate about at Mate. We're passionate about doing what we do. And we love speaking to our mates that are passionate about what they do. So any last words, Dave, from yourself?
You've heard the expression before, but what we're going through at the moment is unprecedented. But whatever, we're not going back to where we were.
Yeah.
And people are really facing challenges to cope with the situations at the moment. Right. So what I would, in terms of that safely thing, the A would be to accept the reality of what's happening at the moment. There's nothing any of us can do about it. We're stuck. So we need to adapt. And we need to appreciate the positives, such as less commuting and more family time, etc. But in terms of trying to cope with our current requirements, let's not be too hard on ourselves. I mean, this really is challenging, particularly for old analog human beings, particularly going into Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. I mean, there is a phenomenon now called Zoom fatigue. And I've written a blog on that too. But worst thing you can do, well, two things if you're going into Zoom meetings. One, do not have back-to-back Zoom meetings. Have a break of at least half an hour in between them. And two, during a normal Zoom meeting, turn your own camera off. Because when we're in a meeting situation, we can't look at ourselves. What we're doing is looking at other people. Yet what we're finding with Zoom meetings, and you got your camera on, you spend a lot of time looking at yourself.
That's true.
And your brain's just not used to that happening. Some people are very pleased with what they see. Other people not so pleased. But then you look at your expression, scratch my nose, that doesn't look too good. What's behind me, all that sort of stuff. And so turn your own camera off. You can have the audio on, you can hear everything that's going on. You can see everybody else. It's just you can't see yourself.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks, David. Thank you for joining us. We've loved having you on, and we would love to have you on in the future for other segments as well. And we'll definitely, I'm sure our viewers, or our listeners, I should say, I keep saying viewers, but listeners would love to I'm sure, hear more from you in the future. And so, look, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll definitely speak to you soon.
It's nice to have mates, so be delighted to help out, particularly say in 2 or 3 weeks' time when a lot of the isolation requirements have been lifted, and we're getting back to what might become the new normal. Might be a good time just to touch base with how it's all going.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, David.
Awesome. Thanks,
Okay,
Dave.
guys.
Have a good
Take
day.
care.
You
Bye.
too. Thanks for listening to the Let's Be Mates podcast by the team at Mate.
Search for the Let's Be Mates podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and at letsbemates.com.au. Hit subscribe to get the latest episode each week.
For all your telco needs, choose a provider you can trust like a mate. Visit letsbemates.com.au, Google Mate, or call us on 13 14 13 to sign up today.
See you soon, mate.